Rock the Ripple. Rock the Ripple. Rock the Ripple. The Rock the Ripple podcast with Narita McInnes.
Let's do this. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rock the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Narita McInnes. It is so awesome to be here with you as always. And as always, today is another very special day because I am joined by another very special guest. She is a holistic counsellor who sees that people aren't mad, bad or sick. They are hurting. And they are, in fact, the answers they have been looking for. Specialising in trauma-informed counselling and working with the 7th generation principle, IFS principles, trigger recognition, hypnotherapy, somatic practices, and more, she is also the founder of Refocus Counselling. There is, of course, so much more to this amazing woman. She is the one and only beautiful inside and out, Julie Santall. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Narita. It's lovely to be here with you. Thank you.
It is so good to be here with you. And I have to give a shout out to the awesome Christopher Kay who connected me with you. And I am just so glad he did because I've just connected with you straight away. I looked at everything that you do and I'm just like, this woman is freaking amazing. I cannot wait to chat to her. So for people who may not know you, can you just give a bit of a background as to who you are and just anything that flows through?
Yeah, well, my name's Julie, obviously, and I'm originally from London. I was born in London and grew up in the South Coast in Seaford in England. And I came here originally I trained as a nurse. I was a registered nurse and I specialised in trauma in the emergency department. And my subsequent journey has taught me why I specialised in trauma, and maybe we'll discuss that later on. But I specialised in trauma and I was sponsored by the Alfred Hospital to come over here in Melbourne in 2003. So, and then I worked as a trauma nurse with the Alfred, but then I moved into complex psychosocial work with what they called the HEART program, which is the Hospital Admission Risk program. So we were seeing people who were frequently presenting to the emergency departments with complex psychosocial issues, homelessness, drug addiction. And it was there that I began to realize that the people that were frequently presenting to the emergency departments with these really dreadfully complex issues and were being treated pretty poorly were coming from a background of real deep trauma, like real deep trauma. And, you know, as a society, we tend to think of trauma as like the big T traumas, sexual abuse and, children being physically abused. Trauma is on a spectrum, but it affects people in different ways. But anyway, so that's when I started to realize that these people were being, it was a coping mechanism for the deep trauma that they held. So I kind of like my journey continued. I worked for the Homeless Persons Program as a nurse. So I was case managing people who were frequently presenting to the emergency department. And that was at first I was in the emergency departments working with them. So I was creating plans. And the idea that we had was that if we could share the plans with different hospitals, then we weren't reinventing the wheel every time somebody came in, because there's such a there's such a break in continuity of care when people are frequently presenting, and then the world and his dog are getting involved and reorganizing different things, and nobody knows who's doing what and where and how. So that was my main effort, but it became pretty apparent that that's not really what they wanted me to do. They didn't want me to do that sort of thing. They didn't want to streamline things. They didn't want people to be, I became very disillusioned very, very quickly, So, my journey traveled and I ended up becoming a drug and alcohol nurse, working with people who have addictions to street drugs and alcohol. And eventually that took me down the route of, I did the qualifications for drug and alcohol counselling. And then I didn't want to do what I could see wasn't helping. That's a double negative, but I could see that CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, motivational interviewing, they have their place, sure, but they don't help people with drug and alcohol issues. It just doesn't, because all people with drug and alcohol issues have got a history of trauma. And I've subsequently come to realize that we all have, I can't put myself out of the picture. And when I started studying the certificate and then the diploma of holistic counselling, I realized then just how deeply traumatized I'd been, and the journey that I'd taken through my young years and through my and leading up to having my daughter. And when you realize that, it really does give you a huge amount of compassion for the people that are sitting in front of you, because there, but for the grace of God go I, do you know what I mean? And as a trauma nurse, I see some of the way that and the nurses and the doctors would treat people. And I would try and talk, because I had one of my roles was the drug and alcohol coordinator for the emergency department down in Frankston. And Frankston, I always term affectionately Franganistan, because it was like, yeah, it's a pretty low socioeconomic area in some areas, and there's some real entrenched drug and alcohol issues down there. And when you realize that you're talking to people they've had the most horrendous childhoods, and so I come with a great deal of compassion. So that led me to becoming a counsellor for people who were addicted to pharmaceutical medications. So Seropax, Valium, codeine, all the drugs that we can get over the counter, or we go to the doctors. And I started then helping people to wean and come off their psychiatric medication. So and at the moment now, I'm helping some people to come off their psychiatric medications, antidepressants, antipsychotics. So I, going back to where I worked with people with Access Health in the MSRS Medication Recovery Support Service. And then when the nonsense started in 2020, I was what they considered an essential worker at first, but then it became really apparent that the writing was on the wall, because there was no way I was going to get that injection. There was no way. And so as absolutely terrifying as it was, I stepped into the great unknown, and I'd found that I'd already been working on my website. I'd already been working on creating a foundation or private membership association. So when the chop finally came, I was ready to go. It was like God handed it to me and said, there you go. Yeah, you've done the work. Here it is. And it's been, that's it. Refocus Counselling was founded in the fiery fires of the forge of losing my job in the whole nonsense. So that's my story. So so I run Refocus Counselling. This year is my year of expansion. So I'm there's lots of things that I've got planned, but that's where I come from.
Wow, that is so cool. That is so awesome. I love you, and I love the work that you're doing, because I honestly believe that, all of us have trauma, like you said, and when we can work through that and heal ourselves, that's the shit that shifts consciousness, because we will love all the parts of us, and that's when we become so untouchable and so powerful. We already are that. It's just removing those layers and calling back those bits that, we may have lost or just forgotten about for a while. You know what I mean?
Narita. The thing is that we've forgotten. We actually have forgotten just who we really are and how powerful we are. And I get quite emotional. I get quite emotional about it, because, when I sit with people and they're in a great deal of pain, and I've been there myself, I recognize it. Do you know what I mean? I recognize where they've been. I had an addiction to opiates myself at one stage, years ago. And it's fundamentally, if we're using the principles of IFS, because I'm not a qualified, I'm not trained in internal family systems specifically, but we used internal family systems as part of my holistic training, and we work with parts. And I find it as a as a process. I wouldn't call it a technique, because that kind of like condenses it down to something that you just, we're just going to use this technique, and it's not. It's a whole way of seeing ourselves. And when we can separate our parts from who we really are, which is when we're feeling calm, when we're feeling regulated. And I use a lot of those terms, regulated, dysregulated. But when we're regulated, meaning we feel inner safety. When we feel safe within, then we have access to what Dick Schwartz calls self-energy, or wise self, which is what he calls the 8 C's. And I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to rattle them all off, because I joke with my clients, I always forget 1 or 2, but the ones that I forget are the ones that we're working with in that moment.
Yeah.
It's not an accidental forgetting, if you see what I'm saying. Well, that's my excuse anyway. Yeah. But we have access to compassion for ourselves. We have access, we're connected not just to the world, but to ourselves. And there's such an epic disconnect happening currently. And it's nobody's fault. It's the way that society has been molded and pushed and squeezed and trained and hypnotized out of self-energy and into almost a constant dysregulated state. You know what I mean? And so why wouldn't a part of you, and we call them firefighters in IFS, but why wouldn't a part of you say, this, can I swear? I was just a bigger.
Yeah, go your hardest.
This is fucked. Don't take something. Get out of it. Just don't feel this. This is too much. It's too much to bear. Why wouldn't a part do that? Though these parts of ourselves are doing this because they're trying to help us, Let's learn to do that, as a teenager, you go to a party, you sing yourself, you have no confidence whatsoever. And you know what it's like as a teenager. So you look in the mirror and all you see is an ugly duckling, and everybody else sees the swan that you really are. And so what do? You have a drink. Somebody says, have a drink. It makes you feel nice. And it does. It does. And then, but that's the dopamine rush, and then some people will end up on the slippery slope to addiction, and it's never a happy ending. But that part was desperately trying to save them, So when you've been through, and when you've traveled that road yourself, and you realize, this part is just, it's trying to help fundamentally. It gives you then compassion. You're not sitting there blaming and shaming. And that's what we've got at the moment, is a society that's divided because everybody has judgment and people don't understand, Yeah.
I think, and that's the key, I think, compassion, one of the keys, because when you've walked that path, or you've experienced it, or you've seen it in your life, that's, your heart expands, doesn't it? And you can relate or have empathy for where somebody is. And I think we need more of that, and to really just allow ourselves to be who we are. And I think it comes a lot back to acceptance as well, of what we've been through and all that sort of stuff. And like we were saying before, everyone has gone through something. And, there's people who will block that off as well. And they're so disconnected, like you were saying, that they're not ever going to be able to open their hearts to others, let alone themselves, because the pain that they've gone through, they've had to squash down. It's rife, really, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And that's a manager, and why wouldn't you want to squash that pain down? And there's some of the trauma that people have been through. And, when I say trauma, it's a tricky word, because it's almost become, like a buzzword. You'll go onto YouTube, and I think I was talking to somebody the other day. The word narcissist is huge at the moment. Everybody is being married to a narcissist, or she's a narcissist. And when I say to my clients, really, is that really? And when you examine it, it's easy to put a label on it. And this is another, God, I could rattle on about this forever, because this is another thing that the psychiatric system and the medical system has done. And we know why that is. It's putting labels on people.
Yeah.
And the DSM-5, is there's no scientific basis behind it whatsoever. The DSM-5 is a bunch of labels to pathologize normal human behavior. And unfortunately, that's what's happened. You know, Krishnamurti said it's no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And it isn't. It isn't. There is you know, when people come and sit in front of me and they tell me their stories, and I'm saying, you know, look, well, why do you expect? How can you expect to feel peace, joy, happiness, and spiritual enlightenment when you're working through what you've been through? You know, and nobody teaches us these things when we're young. A young child sitting at school, you know, I'm probably going off on a tangent here, but a young child, I've got, you know, clients who as young boys were labeled with the label of ADHD, which is another term that seems to be ubiquitous at the moment as well, which is basically labeled for human behavior again. We're pathologizing normal human behavior. And you know, when I say normal, it's normal it's not abnormal to act in a certain way in a certain circumstance. So a young lad or a young girl sitting at school, children aren't supposed to sit still and just absorb information. That's not the way that children learn. And yet a child will be fidgeting around, and because their body just wants to move and get out there and feel and experience. That's what we're supposed to do. We learn through our five senses. And yet a child will be pathologized for not being able to sit still. And then we've got all the nonsense phones. You know, I've seen 7-year-old children with phones in their hands, younger 3-year-olds with an iPad. Their focus is completely being, you know, shattered into 1,000 different pieces. So then they're supposed to sit in front of a teacher and just listen to this teacher talking all day. And with their nervous systems jangled all over the place, with parents who are working, you know, 2 or 3 jobs, both of them out all day, going to these childcare centres, which are being built everywhere, which is you're handing over your child to somebody that you've no idea what their values are. You have no idea where they've come from. You have no idea what their emotional triggers are. And they're looking after your child. And then your child goes to school and is labelled with ADHD, is given dexamphetamine, which is one chemical molecule away from methamphetamine. And then they're medicalized and pharmaceuticalized until they're 16 when they come off. And then their body has their brain in the most important developmental part of their life. Their brain has been put on this Ritalin and has developed with this. And then they're supposed to go out into the world and not be able and not function without it. So what do? There's the methamphetamine that's been ice that's been introduced into the streets. There's the cocaine that the government knows is being flown into the country at the top of the Northern Territories and it's coming down and infiltrating the streets. So they become the next drug addict on the street. And then society looks at them as if they're a failure. You know, it's just, yeah, you're giving me a soapbox and I'm standing around because you know, in the 20 years that I was working on the streets with clients who have been, you know, like a young man who was stealing from shops, you know, like Target, and had a really sophisticated set of receipts that he would keep, and he'd go in and he'd do things, and I couldn't understand what he was doing because he was getting money to buy heroin for his mother. And that's how he loved his mother, because that's how he needed to feel safe. His mother needed heroin. If she didn't have heroin, she'd be withdrawing. And so he needed to do that for her to feel safe. That was his family. You tell me that that's wrong. You can't tell me that that's wrong, because this is a young man who wants to feel. The need to belong is huge, and that's his needing to belong. He bought his mother heroin, you know. It's you look at a society and you wonder what went wrong when, how long ago it went wrong, and you can only look at what's happening now, as uncomfortable as it is, and say, okay, this is really needed, you know. This is like the cold I've just had, this massive, big, ugly, horrible, uncomfortable detox, but it's got to come out, you know.
Yeah.
It's got to come out, and that's what's happening, I think, in society at the moment.
Yeah, it absolutely is like exactly how you explained that. It's like the cold, it's like a declutter. This has to happen. The things that aren't working have to be seen and brought to the surface. We need to open our hearts more and more.
Yeah,
And really, I mean, you can't just judge a book by its cover. You really, and I think that is our humanity is to be there for each other and to support one another. And we do in times of craziness and bushfires and things. We all come together. That's what we have to do at the grassroots level, and really feel into the stories and what's been going on, and and I think as well that the where what we can see and what we're able to hold, the space we're able to hold and what we're able to see is as far as we can really look within ourselves. And that's why I think the work that you're doing is
yeah,
so freaking powerful, because that's where it starts. So if we can look at our deepest, darkest, we can hold space and do the same for others. And that creates a ripple effect that just goes throughout the humanity and the cosmos. And that's why I love what you're doing. And I love that you just shared everything that you have, because it's so needed to hear. And
mm,
sometimes these stories are tough to hear, but they need to be heard.
mm.
And we need to be able to transmute them and work through it, because there's no other way, is there, really?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, Narita, is it's the sitting in the discomfort. And I say often to my clients, I'm not here to wave a magic wand. I'm not here. I can't do that for you. And that's why on my website I use the picture of a hand in the darkness, because my role and the therapist's role, the ideal is that we hold the torch for the person in the darkness
Mm.
until that person can hold that torch and shine the light themselves and find their way themselves. That's how I see myself, as I walk beside somebody and I hold the torch for them until I hand it over to them, until they have the ability to be able to look in and see the patterns that have been created by necessity through the way that they've been molded and the way that their life has gone. What we're looking at is just a bunch of patterns. Like I was with a client yesterday and he was getting really upset because the tobacco shop wouldn't take his tobacco back. And the
Mm.
woman, and I could see two patterns, just like literally just arguing against each other. And that's all that's happening, is that most people, we're not actually even talking to the human being. We're talking to the persona or the pattern that's actually front presenting. You know what I mean?
Mm.
When you start, like I said, when I went through, and still do, I still see a counselor myself. I wouldn't be able to do my work if I didn't, have
Mm.
my feelings every now and then. And well, daily sometimes.
Mm.
But when you start looking, like exactly like you said, when you start seeing that what you see out there is in here, actually, it's actually in here. And what we're doing is busy defending ourselves against something that we actually don't like within ourselves.
Mm.
And unfortunately, the New Age movement has watered it down and distilled it down to something that is actually nearly meaningless. If you spat it, you got it. Yes, to a certain extent, but it goes much deeper than that. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Once we begin to see that the evil out there is the evil within us, once we accept that everything that we see out there is a part of us as well, then we don't sit there in judgment quite so much. We can't sit from a pedestal of going, well, I'm better than them. When we start realizing that actually I've got that part too. Every day I sit with clients and I see the mirror. I literally, and that, when I was my last partner, I remember when we were splitting up, and it was incredibly painful. And I remember sitting outside in the back garden and I was just contemplating like you do. And I heard this voice, literally, this is way before I'd done the diploma, way before I'd started any work on myself. It's when I was just waking up to everything.
Mm.
And I heard this voice and it said, "You're fighting a mirror." And it was such a fundamental, hugely revelationary truth that I felt reverberate through my being, that I recognize, oh my God, I'm the angry one. It's not, you're so angry, he used to say. And I go, no, I'm not the angry one. You're the angry one. Rah. And I was, no, it's me. I'm the angry one. It all comes from me. I'm just fighting what I'm seeing in myself. Do you know what I mean? And I forget. We still forget. Every day we forget. But it's a calling to remember. And when you actually do that work on you, and you have the guts, all my clients, I admire them so much, because they come in and they sit down and they're willing to wallow around in the snot and the tears and the uncomfortableness and the pain and all of it to see, well, why am I the way that I am? And why do I experience the things that I experience? What is it about me that is creating this? And then we move through the whole, well, not to be a victim about it, oh, woe is me, I do more. It's not anything to do with that. It's nothing to do with that. It's what happened to you, what happened to your mum and your dad, what happened to their mum and dad, and their mum and dad, and their mum and dad. Yeah, so I'm learning, I'm actually studying, well, it's very, very slowly, but family constellations as well at the moment.
Oh, awesome.
Because I do structural constellations. So when I work with clients, I can work with their internal family. And that's a phenomenological work. So basically what we're doing is we're tapping into the energy, because that's what holistic counselling is. It's more like holistic psychotherapy, really. It's deeper than counselling. It utilizes mind, body, and spirit. It acknowledges the fact that we are not just a body, and we're not just a brain. We have a soul and we have a spirit, and that informs all three. It's the mind, the body, and the spirit. So when you're working phenomenologically with structural constellations, what you're doing is you're literally working with the energy and the feelings of your inner family. And we put pieces of paper on the floor and we stand on them. And that helps the client to be able to externalize a little bit what's going on for them. Because you know what it's like. We can sit there and everything just bounces around like a bloody ping pong ball inside you. Unless you can get it. Unless you can have somebody in front of you to mirror back to you what it is, and know that person has got nothing but absolute, unconditional admiration and respect and love and compassion for you. It's unconditional, You didn't land in front of me as a person who does what, blah, blah, whatever it is, because you had a perfect childhood, sweetheart. You land in front of me because something happened somewhere, and it's not your fault. It's not their fault either. But it happened. So let's deal with it. Let's have a look at it.
Yeah. Wow, you are so awesome, Julie. We need to multiply you across the planet.
There are plenty of people who do, like Brenda Sutherland, who runs the Awakening group. I do regular supervision with her, and there's a few of us who are working out there doing the holistic counselling sort of thing. Unfortunately, probably. Now, I can't say that's a sweeping generalization, but most of the time in the system, in the health system, I can't say that they do, because it's unfortunately the way that the system is run is the pathologization of, like I said, human behavior. We've pathologized sadness. It's okay to be sad. It's sad. It's the ebb and flow of life, I go to certain places and I feel sad, because you can feel the energy of the place is sad. What we've got going on in the world at the moment the amount of human energy, the emotions that are being, projected out into the ethers, and we're all connected. We're all fundamentally connected. We're feeling that. We're feeling people's distress. We're feeling people's pain. We're feeling the energy, which is why, you hear people saying, think positive or think loving thoughts. It actually is really important that at the moment we acknowledge the fact I'm sad, and have those tears, have that rage, have that pain, so that we can start thinking rationally, Nerida. Because at the moment, there's not a lot of rational thinking, least of all in the power structures. Do you know what I mean? Going back to what I was saying, the psychiatric system is pathologizing normal human behavior because the universities are funded by the pharmaceutical companies. And the whole of the psychiatric system is built on not scientific basis, not that we can even say that that's trustworthy at the moment. Do you know what I mean? But it's not based on science. It's based on, the DSM is based on complete guesswork. It's a bunch of people came together and had a bunch of symptoms, created labels for them, agreed to and didn't agree that they'd go into this book. And then the pharmaceutical company coming along and said, okay, yeah, well, we've got a tablet for that. I still meet people who believe that depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain. There's no such thing. It was made up by Eli Lilly as a marketing tool. And that the tablets would create would provide the natural, would provide the balance that the brain needed. Is bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. There's no such thing as a chemical imbalance of the brain. Nobody's ever proved it. Nobody's ever seen it. It's been debunked. And yet I worked with people who still believed that, who still believed it, And the journey to come off psychiatric medications, antidepressants, is horrendous. It's just a lot of people find it really difficult. I used to, when I was, like I said before, I started the work on myself. Before I was on antidepressants, I was on Effexor, and I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea, and when I did that, when I had my waking up in around about 2012, that's when it started. So around about 2014, I came off my psychiatric medications in 2014. I just cold turkeyed it, and then wondered why I spent weeks crying, and feeling like absolute diabolical. But it's because of the withdrawal symptoms from these medications. Nowadays, there's many people out there trying to help people to withdraw, but not in the mainstream. I've heard of a drug and alcohol doctor who told one of my clients, oh, no, I can just stop Prozac. I was like, no, you have to wean it down. You have to allow your body, because the body becomes dependent on it. It's as much of a process to come off psychiatric medications as it is to come off street medications. And yet what we've got is media telling you that this drug is bad and we should condemn people, and this drug is good and you should take it. And they're doing exactly the same thing. They're not doing, from a fundamental basis, they're doing exactly the same thing. They're telling people that it's not all right to have your feelings. Don't show your feelings now. Little boys with mothers who've had their own trauma from their fathers in their life, terrified of their little boy's anger, shut it right down. Shut it right down. Fathers who feel overwhelmed by their little girl's tears, and I'm not just, it's not a male female thing, it's parents who never had their own feelings acknowledged by their own parents, pass that down to their children, and through the attachment wounding. You don't have to have a big T trauma. Through attachment wounding, is what we call the small T trauma, if you like, because the trauma, the effects of the trauma isn't in the trauma itself. It's not in the event itself. It's how it was managed afterwards and how long it went on for. So you can have an event trauma that happened. So like when I was 6, I fell off a swing and ripped my arm open. My poor mother, she was pregnant with my sister. Now, my mother's nervous system was never regulated. She was very angry. She was very mistrustful of the world. And I suppose what you'd put the term narcissist on her now for a collection of the behaviors that she had. But that's not her fault. And I've done a lot of work on being able to forgive that, the effect on me, not forgive her, because only God can do that, but forgive the circumstances around it that happened, and then work on what happened to me around it. But, you know, when I fell off the swing, I was crying, terrified. I thought I was going to die. I can remember it now. I thought I was going to die and lose my arm. Is my arm going to drop off? And all she could say to protect herself is, don't be ridiculous. Now that's trauma right there, 6 years of age. Don't be ridiculous. It went in that I was being ridiculous to be terrified that my arm was going to drop off. She was saying that because she was just about to give birth to my sister. She was terrified herself and dysregulated. She was in fight flight. And so what came out was the defense. Don't be ridiculous. She was trying to save her nervous system. But I was a 6-year-old child. I don't get that. I don't understand that. All I know is that my mum is telling me off because I've hurt myself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So in it goes. And then 46 years later or whatever it is, there I am sitting in front of my therapist crying my eyes out because I don't understand why I can't be kind to myself when I feel hurt, when I feel sad, when I feel terrified. Why have I got a part that goes, oh, for God's sake, you're being ridiculous? The voices in our heads are the voices of our parents, the voices of our caregivers, the voices of our teachers, the voices of the kindergarten workers. If there's, you know, anyway, I could just talk for a million years on this because I see it all, you know, I see it. I saw it when I was a kid. I saw what was happening in my household. I could see it, you know, and people don't like to hear it. They don't like to hear it.
But I'm so glad that you are sharing this because it's so common. It's so common, and I'm sure people can relate. I mean, you don't feel your feelings, you know, you be a good girl, you be a good boy, you just, you know, like you were saying, like, I remember, oh yeah, I fell off the cubby house, and I remember that, oh, I wasn't supposed to be on the roof, so I went and hid with a sliced open hand so I didn't get into trouble because I didn't want to, like, it's just, I'm sure everyone can relate to a story like that. And that's the thing, and I'm glad you're talking about like big T, little t trauma. It doesn't matter. The trauma is the trauma. It's not the event itself. It's what it brings about in your body. And then if you're having this conditioning of you're being ridiculous every day, that adds up. That's a compound effect. And then, you know, because that's why I'm so passionate as well, like you, about wanting to help people reprogram their subconscious mind, is because we're breaking those patterns that have been there, not just in our lifetimes, but it's generational, because as you said, that's what's been happening with your parents. That's how they learned, you know, and that's how their parents learned. And so you see all these people, like you were saying before, the patterns, it's like the little kids having conversations in big adult bodies, you know, like trying to, work the
That's
shit out.
exactly what it is. Absolutely. I'll tell you a story, right? So when the nonsense started, when I was watching what was going on in America, and they started talking about putting the masks on and wearing the masks. And now I've worked in theatres, I've worked in the emergency departments and worn a mask for my work, you know? It didn't faze me at all because it was part of my work.
Yeah.
When this nonsense came in with the mask, I literally, the day that they announced that we'd have to wear masks, I howled. I went, ah! And I was like, where is this coming from? I was aware that I was having a really, really big bodily reaction to this. I was shaking, my hands were sweating. I had to go. I was on my way to an appointment to acupuncture at the time, and I had to go into office works. And I wasn't ever wearing a mask. Never was I going to wear a mask. I was like, this is nonsense. It's ridiculous. So there was a part of me that was really angry, and it was protecting this part of me that was freaking terrified. And I was like, where is this terror? Why have I got this deep terror? Because I was aware of it. It was almost like I was sitting next to myself, you know. There was a terror, And then there was the part that was protecting the terror, which is my anger that wanted to say, fuck you and fuck you and fuck you to everyone. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I was really aware that there was all this going on. But meanwhile, I was shaking like a leaf and my heart was in and my throat. And I was in office works and I was like, whoa, Julie, this is a big response you're having here. But I knew I was having it, but I didn't know the genesis of it. Anyway, I had a session with my teacher and we were talking about it. And then she was doing something. I can't remember what she was even doing. I can't even remember what she was doing. But all of a sudden, Nerida, I smelled ether. I could smell the ether. You remember when you're a kid and you have your tonsils out and they put the mask over your face? I smelled that strongly. And then I had this flash in my head of the mask coming down over my face. I was like, holy mother of God. That was when I had my tonsils out when I was 10. And the memory came back. I'm lying on this operating table. That's when, this is back in the dark ages because I'm 60 now, you know what I mean? So that's 50 years ago. And I'm lying on the table. I'm freezing cold. I'm terrified. And there's this black mask coming down over my face. And as soon as I realized where it was coming from, I was able then to have the feelings of terror. Oh, shake, 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 shake it, cry, shake it out, move it through my body. And I was then able to go out, never wear a mask, never. And never once just walk with my head held high, just looking straight ahead. And I remember some dude in Maxi said to me, he said, "You're not wearing a mask." And I turned and I looked at him and I said, "Pardon?" He said, "You're not wearing a mask." I went, "No, I'm not, am I?" And just walked out because I no longer had that part that needed to be protected. I didn't have. So my angry part, like just I'm protected. It's all right. I've got your back. It's all right. Fuck off. I haven't got that part. So this is what I wanted to do. And this is what I want to do at the moment is I want to help people to understand that underneath is the terror. And if they can learn to be the parent to themselves that they never had, if they can learn to hold that inner child and just be with her, bring her in close or bring him in close and say, "It's all right, sweetheart. I'm hearing you." You do that for yourself. Then you're not pointing the finger out there. Then we haven't got people shouting, screaming and cursing at each other. The only reason people get road rage is because they're terrified. And their angry part is protecting the part inside that's like, shit, I nearly lost my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if we can get to that, if I can help people to see that they're not bad, they're not mad, they're not sad, they're hurting. They're hurting. We're all hurting. This world is hurting. It breaks my heart to see what's happening because the world is hurting, and having been through that hurt and still my parts come up, I sit in front of clients every day, can feel it in me. And I'm like, and then I come home and I have counselling myself with my reevaluation counsellor, or I see Brenda, or I see my own psychotherapist, Yeah, this past 2 weeks of not feeling very well, all the thoughts come up because of the terror, all of them come up. I'm like, oh, that's still there then, But I don't blame myself for it. Yeah. I don't think there's something wrong with me. And that's the thing. That's what most people, unfortunately, there's nothing wrong with any of you. We're all hurt.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. I love your heart and how you express it. It's so true. We are hurting. We've all gone through something and we're here to support each other. And when you can, like, I love that you talked about being the parent to your inner child. Like, to me, that's been some of the most powerful work that I've been doing. Like, it's giving yourself what you didn't get, and not because it was your fault, not because it was your parents' fault. They didn't know how, or whatever it might be. And you can't control what happened to you, but you can control how you show up for yourself now. Absolutely. And the power's in our hands, isn't it?
Absolutely. 100%. And that's why I believe, Nerida, the powers that shouldn't be And I can't even say that they're actual people. I don't even think at some stage they are. I think there's some entities coming through somewhere along the line. There's some very demonic things happening.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different rabbit hole. But, you know, now I've lost my train of thought because I was talking too much again.
It's great.
What was I just about to say?
We're just talking about how the power is in our hands.
Yes, that's right. And so we've been trained as a society to believe that we don't have any power. And that comes from the schooling system, you know, because we're being trained to be in prison fundamentally, you know, sit down, put your hand up if you want to go to the toilet. You can't eat when you want to eat. You can't go for a wee when you want to have a wee. You can't, you know, do what you want to do. And there's an authoritative figure that you've got to listen to. And that is our entrainment for society. And this is normal behavior, because this is what normal looks like on the TV. And in actual fact, I mean, I can't watch TV. I stopped watching TV over 15 years ago. And that's what I think was part of my waking up, because I hadn't watched TV. I'm convinced that television, well, I know that television actually hypnotizes people, but as soon as I stopped watching TV, it allowed something happened in my brain that allowed it to be open to other things. You know what I mean? But we've been entrained what normal behavior actually is and what it looks like, what is normal and what isn't normal. You know what I mean? Like I realized that my whole idea of America came from the films I watched about America, you know, and I thought, oh, well, hang on a minute then. If my whole idea about America comes from the films I've watched about America, that means that the idea of what was supposed to be and what was not supposed to be comes from the TV. And that's how they did COVID. It was an egregore. It was a thought form. That's all it was. It didn't exist in reality. It was just put out there, and then the infrastructure was provided around it. So it actually became real. It was a spell. It was a magic spell, fundamentally. That's what it was. It was an egregore. And so similarly, what's been happening is that as a society, we're told that this is normal. This is how you're supposed to act. This is how you're supposed to be. This is what a man is. This is what a woman is. And I mean, that is a whole another ball game. Do you know what I mean? With the whole gender nonsense. This is how you're supposed to look. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to do it. And this is the timeline in which you're supposed to do it. And if you don't do it this way, then you're not right. So, you know, counselling men of 38 who are terrified because they haven't got a partner. And I said, so where's the rule book that says that by 38, you've got to have a partner and a dog and a kid and a house and a this and a that and going on 2 weeks holiday to wherever it is every year? Where's the book that says that? This is an idea that we've been given. We've been given an idea about everything, and we're conforming to something that doesn't exist, anything beyond an egregore that's been introduced into society. Individuality is looked on as like you're some sort of a crazy person. You know what I mean? The psychiatric system will tell a mother who's overwhelmed by having her first child that she's got postpartum depression. And then if I said to somebody, no, you haven't, they'd say, well, you know, you don't understand. This is the way I feel. And I say, well, let's try taking the label away from it. You've got a baby. You've never had a baby before. It's a huge responsibility. If you weren't looked after the way that you should have been looked after or could have been looked after by your parents, you have no idea what happens when that baby cries. You know that, and when that baby cries, all you're going to feel inside is the memory of what happened to you when you were crying. And if you're not on it, if you're not right there on it, you're going to respond in the same way as you did, because that's what you learned. That's what love looked like. But is it unreasonable for a woman to feel overwhelmed, sad, and completely lost at sea when she is under the pressure of going back to work, because two people have to work to maintain the household? She's probably separated from her parents because of the way that society is at the moment. We don't live in a village. We live isolated in pockets and with other people that we're comparing ourselves against. Oh, she does it better than me. Her pram's bigger than mine. Their house is bigger than mine. His car's bigger than mine. You know what I mean? We're comparing all the time. And so a woman who isn't sleeping, who's finding it difficult to get her baby to latch onto the breast because she's stressed or her milk to let down, because this is what happened to me. When my daughter was born, I was terrified, deeply traumatized from my childhood, without a clue, living in an army barracks with my ex-husband, and wanting and off work, and knowing that I needed to go back to work after the requisite maternity leave. And there I am, terrified of this tiny little thing that I'm suddenly left alone with, who couldn't latch on. So the more she cried, the more tense I got. The more tense I got, the more my letdown reflex didn't work. And because my baby's nervous system is my nervous system, and this is what I say to my clients, your nervous system is your mother's nervous system for a good 6 weeks after you're born, maybe even longer. And that you don't even know that you're a separate entity. So if you've got a mother who's like, and was like that while you were in utero as well, you're getting your mum's cortisol, you're getting your mum's adrenaline, so already you're born with a nervous system. And then what they do with mothers in birth, the birth trauma that most people have nowadays, because birth has been medicalized and turned into a medical emergency and made into convenience for men, so that, you know, the male doctors can, a woman's on her back, she, you know, her pelvis is not in the right position to open and let the baby come down. So she's on her back, she's got monitors, she's got this, she's got that. She's treated like it's some sort of an emergency. She's terrified giving birth. So all that is happening. And then the baby's supposed to just sleep, you know, and you're supposed to be able to cope with it. It's just, we're setting society up to be traumatized. It's almost, I mean, it's very clever, really. You've got to take your hats off to them. It's a very, very clever thing that they've been doing. But I honestly believe, Nerida, that what is happening at the moment, it's literally to bring all this shit up to the surface. And I feel the discomfort of it. Believe you me, I feel it. You know, I'm like, sometimes when I'm observing what I'm observing. But I truly believe that those of us who are hearing that call, oh, something's got to change here. I've got to change. That's what we're hearing the call at the moment. This is the end of an era. It's the end of a period of time. You know, my Christian friends would call it some people call it the little season, you know, the time of Satan, that we've had the millennial reign when Jesus was already on earth. That's past, and we're in the little season where Satan reigns. Some people will say it's that, you know, other people have different ideas about it, but fundamentally what is happening is a massive shakeup. It's a massive, and we're moving into a higher consciousness, and that's not new agey. That is actually something that's actually happening, you know. And are we brave enough to hear the call? Are we brave enough?
Yeah. Well, this time is all about courage, isn't it? It really is all about courage. You know, you whether you like to or not, you're gonna be faced with all this stuff, aren't you? And that's what happens. You either go, okay, I'm doing this, and I'm just gonna get the scars. I'm gonna go through. I'm gonna feel my feelings. I'm going to sit in the discomfort of all of this shit. And that's the technical term. You will sit in the shit. You got to, and you don't stay there, but you stay there for as long as you need to stay there.
Yeah, and with the knowledge that there's somebody there with you.
Yeah,
and you know, and not to rely on you, because I don't want people to rely. I don't want people to rely on me. That's not my aim. You know, my aim is to hand them the tools so that they can do what I, you know, like. Don't do as I don't. What was it? Don't do as I do. Do as I say. Don't do as I say. Do as I do. There's some expression, but anyway, I want to say. I mean, I don't disclose to all my clients, but in times I do. Do you know what I mean? Because that's the other thing about mainstream. And I'm not dissing, because there are beautiful people out there with beautiful hearts doing the best that they possibly can. I can't say that everybody out in mainstream is not doing a good job, because that's disingenuous and it's not real, you know. So there are good people, but the system, the way that the system would have it, is that you've got your therapist who doesn't share, who sits in a position of I'm higher than you. I've been to those sorts of psychologists myself. And I was searching around for the people to help me. And that's one of the most important things as well, is that you've got to search around. You've got to, do I click with this person? Do they get me? Do I feel comfortable? Because if you're sitting there in a therapy chair and you're wondering, that you're terrified of your therapist, or your therapist is hiding behind their mask of I'm better than you, you're not going to get anywhere,
No.
And that's why in my rooms, I'm down on the floor with people. I'm with them, Like I'll say, like I said to another client of mine the other day, I'm working with her for her communication with her daughter. And I'm saying, I couldn't do this if I hadn't done this myself.
Yeah.
And clients are, when I used to work in drug and alcohol, my clients used to say to me, did you ever take drugs? And I'd often ask them, do I need to have taken every drug under the sun to have helped, to be able to help you? Because I've taken drugs. Of course I have, when I was a kid, when I was out and about. I don't like them very much. So I don't like the feeling of being out of control in a general situation. I've drunk a lot of alcohol in my time as well. There was a period of time when alcohol was a really good friend. And I understand why that was, but nowadays I can see that was just to take me away from my body. It was to take me away from the experience that I was having. But, I will say to my clients, if it's appropriate, this is the experience that I've had. I have had to work on the relationship between me and my daughter. Because before I woke up to myself and what I was doing, I was bringing the sins of the fathers through me with my daughter. And we've had to do a lot of work together. And I've had to say to her, that your attachment is due to what happened when you were little, And I did the best I could given the circumstances. And that's fundamentally what I want people to remember, is that we really are. We're doing the best that we can given the circumstances. Everybody is. Even the most irritating person that on this side of the planet, they're doing the best that they can. And how can we then take responsibility for where we are in that? How can we take the responsibility for our behavior in that? We can't change them. We can't. But we can change ourselves. We can't change the big wide world, but we can change ourselves. And through this connection that we have, because we all are connected, we change ourselves, it ripples on and it ripples on and it ripples on. It's like the name of your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's the goal. That is the goal, to rock that ripple, to do it. And that's how we do it. Like, I think it really is so simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy.
Oh, so important, Narita. It is simple, but it isn't easy. It's one of the hardest things you'll do.
Yeah.
It really is. Sitting there going, holy shit, I did that, But then finding that, oh God, is it any surprise, really? And that's not to excuse it, because there's it's not my fault because, I was brought up in blah, blah, blah. So it's not my fault. That's not taking responsibility. Right? It's like, I have to take responsibility for that. Yeah, I did do that. I did, the circumstances behind it were this, but I could have chosen a different way and I didn't. And that's the outcome. And then how do we work with the parts that feel shame and blame and, guilt and all those sorts of things? And that's what I work with people every day, those parts that hold, and they're young and they're little. Because, and they carry that through. They're always very young parts that hold that shame and that blame and that guilt. Because how many times as a kid, I mean, to parents, I'll say, just take a breath. When you feel that hitch, your child's doing something, you've asked them not to do it, or you're late for work and they need to eat their breakfast and get their shoes on, or get in the car, or you've got a teenager lying in bed and they're not doing anything all day long, feel what's coming up in yourself, own that what's coming up in you, take a breath and come from the perspective of, well, what's happening for them? You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. It's just owning yourself. It's owning your own behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on as well the shame, those feelings of guilt. Like, I think so many of us, that has shaped us more than we even realize. And it holds us back from being our full potential because we don't think we deserve success, or we are afraid to shine and have success because do we deserve it? So like, it's like that nuanced thing, and it plays into everything. And so when we do this work on ourselves, when we have the courage to step up, look at all of our parts, we do allow ourselves to step into our power, warts and all.
Yeah.
And we recognize that in other people, and we know, like, we can look around and go, hey, man, I've fucked up so many times. Yeah, me too. Let's just fucking smash this. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Because we all have. Nobody hasn't.
No.
Nobody. You know. So I mean, you'll be surprised when you start admitting to you, like, oh God, yeah, I did that. Oh, and own it. You know. It then allows other people to feel relaxed and say, yeah, well, I did that as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do something for myself personally. It's reevaluation counselling. It's about having your feelings, right? And one of the things that they say in reevaluation counselling is that fundamentally, like I said, where everybody is wanting to have a turn. That's, you meet somebody in the street, and Australia is great for it. And I'm from the UK, and I'm not saying that the UK English people don't have their foibles and their patterns and their parts as well, because we do.
Yeah.
But in Australia, what I've noticed is that there's tall poppy syndrome, that people don't like to see people succeed. They really don't like it when somebody does better than them. That's something that I've noticed. And the other thing is that it's very closed in. People are very closed in and keep to themselves. So, and people tend to have friends that they've had since they were at school, and they keep in that little group. And as an English person coming in to Australia and trying to make friends, you know, I noticed it was very difficult to make friends because people tend to close in. And I've thought about it, and I don't know if it's because we're on an island, or because fundamentally, if you think about it, it was populated by people who were either falsely accused or had stolen a potato and were put on a boat to come out here. So if you think about that's coming down. So people are defensive, they're closed, they're suspicious, they don't trust. Well, of course, you know what I mean? You've got their originator was coming from England, where they stole potatoes and they were on the poverty line, and then they came over here. Do you know what I mean? That they're not going to trust anyone. So when you look at it that way, you think, oh yeah, well, that's where it all comes from. You know, it's not your fault. You're not a bad person. It's just that there's something going on for you that you haven't yet acknowledged, and you know, let's laugh about it. You know, get to the point where you can laugh about what you did, not in a way of not caring, but in a self-depreciatory way, you know, like, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
Feel the feelings and have compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing a lot of that lately, and it's at myself and at the situation, and because I do have a dark sense of humor as well too, so that that helps me along the way. So when shit's hitting the fan, and people are reacting how they are, and you just like, oh, that's hilarious. It's hilarious. Like, but that doesn't mean that I think it's hilarious, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you find your way. And I think, the more that you do this stuff, you come back to compassion, and just coming back to that place of just loving ourselves, all the bits, just all the bits.
When we feel safety, that's fundamentally what it is. So when from a somatic perspective, it's getting into your body, recognizing what's happening in your body, and regulating your nervous system. Because when we're regulated, when we're not in when we're in fight flight, which is sympathetic, the more the arousal increases, the more our prefrontal cortex, which is the newest part of the brain, that's where we make rational decisions from. Now, if we're in fight flight, so if we're in worry, anxiety, panic, which is the fright, the flight, or if we're in fight, which is the rage, the anger, all those, if that hasn't got anywhere to go, if it's not actually directed at anything in particular, because nothing actually is happening in our immediate circumstances, if it's in our body and we're not recognizing it, then it looks like everything's out there. We've got a big, massive fight out there. If we then can start recognizing what's happening in my body, oh, my heart rate is hot. Oh, I'm not breathing, like, because when people get, when people are frightened, or when they're angry, or when they're upset, I notice people don't breathe. You stop breathing, and you'll see people crying. And there's no breath. Instantaneously, your body's like, holy shit, we're about to die. It's the body is in fight flight. The prefrontal cortex flips. There's no rational thinking. So which is why we see the people getting out their cars and punching on in the street when they've nearly dinged somebody else's car. Or like I said yesterday with my client trying to take his tobacco back, and the woman behind the counter throwing his tobacco across the room, and then he got all arced up, and I'm like, whoa, Nelly, let's just take some breaths. Just take some breaths. If we can start recognizing what's happening in our body and just take a breath. Before we do anything, it's just bring ourselves back into the parasympathetic ventral vagal, which is where we're rest and digest, where we're seeking safety through connection. When we're in sympathetic, we're seeking safety through action, which is either punch somebody or get the fuck out, If we're seeking safety through connection, it's because we are a regulated nervous system. We're safe. We provide safety around us. It ripples out of us. If we feel safe to people around us, it helps regulate them as well. And then it helps them, and then it helps them. And this is how we regulate the world. Now, at the moment, the powers that be, that shouldn't be, are doing their best to dysregulate everybody, because they know what happens to us when we're dysregulated. And if that, what can I call it? I don't want to call it a trauma, but if that stimulus continues intensely like it has been, and to all intents and purposes, from what I'm listening to and from the astrology, it's going to get that way even more this year. And I don't know about you, but I can feel it in my nervous system.
Yep.
I can definitely feel it in my nervous system. If we're not able to regulate ourselves, then they're going to get what they want, which is civil war, which is a complete breakdown of society. Do you know what I mean? And then they can swoop in with the control. But if we can act like grown-ups, and that's not derogatory, because we've all got inner children, it's not a derogatory thing to say, but if we can start to regulate ourselves, then that ripples out. So in the early days of the nonsense, I was running Tame Your Triggers workshops for the people who were going to the protests. I never went to a protest. It wasn't my thing. That wasn't my place. But what I was doing was helping people to recognize what was going on in their body, so that when they were there and the police were there, being the way that the police were, because you can bet your bottom dollar those police were terrified as well. So they were coming from a triggered, like a dysregulated place. So I say to them, if you as a protester can be a regulated nervous system, then you're not going to emanate fear. They're not going to pick up on your fear. We're like animals picking up on each other's pheromones. You know what I mean? That's what creates the dysregulation and increase in tempers and people fighting each other. If we can remain regulated, if we can become our thinking minds on, if our prefrontal cortexes are in place and we're thinking, we can be rational, and then we're far more effective than fuck you and all this sort of business. That doesn't get anywhere. All it does is dysregulates the police, and then they're like, oh, okay, let's get the shields and do the thing, So it's our job. If we have those skills, to teach it to other people. And that's what I really want to do, is help people get into a regulated, get into their bodies, because most of us are heads on sticks. Literally heads on sticks. If I say to somebody, when they're talking to me and they begin to emote, they're having emotions, and I'm saying, okay, just take a breath and let's just stop and just feel what's happening in your body. What's the sensation in your body? Many people can't even tell me. They go, I don't know. Oh, we've all got that part that jumps up and goes, I don't know, because we don't have to think then. Do you know what I mean? It just goes, I don't know. So we have to ask that part to step aside, the part that instantaneous goes, I don't know. And people get uncomfortable, but if we can begin to feel the sensations, we can give it a name. We can see where it is on our body. Oh, there, that's that. Oh, there's that tightness in my chest. Oh yeah, I can feel it now. I'm breathing from up here. When we're breathing like that, our body's taking the message. It's like, yeah, you're in trouble, you're in danger. And then our mind wants to make meaning of that sensation. But if we're conscious of it, all our mind is responding to is, he's an arsehole and I'm going to punch him. Yeah. Or she's a bitch and I'm going to take all our money, or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? We're just thinking about the emotion as opposed to where's it coming from? Where is it in my body? How can I regulate myself into a nervous system, into a ventral vagal, into a safe space, so that I can see the person in front of me as a human being who's got patterns and not as a saber-toothed tiger that needs to be run from or shot. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Safety. It's all about becoming a regulated nervous system and recognizing and being able to be there for yourself, which is the parent to the inner child.
Yeah.
And then we have access to self-energy, which is the 8 C's, which is being calm, being compassionate. We have access to being connected. We have clarity. We have courage. We have access to our creativity. And we're confident. I don't know if that's 8. There's probably one missing. And if there is, that's the one that's in the room here with us.
Absolutely. You did well.
As long as nobody was sitting there going like this.
Yeah.
Oh, really, you missed one out.
Yeah. But that's so true. And I love that you said that. I mean, and I love that we all bring it in a different flavor. Like, to me, like you were saying, like when we feel safe, we ripple that out. So our power is in our frequency. So that's like when we stand in our power and we know ourselves and who we are, that ripples out and people feel that. Yeah, they feel that. And I'm sure you can sit here and you can think, yeah, there is a person that when I'm around them, I feel totally safe. Yeah. Like it's just, and they've never said anything, but that's how I feel. Yeah. And then there's people where you're on edge. Yeah. And what would you say to people when they are on edge? Like, would you go, okay, there's something, because life is a mirror, but we're always reflecting back and forth. Like, what would you say to something like that?
If you're with somebody who's on it, well, it depends on the context, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
So like, I can go into a shop, say, and I can tell that the shop, somebody who's serving me, you can tell by their movements, that you can tell by their eyes. When I was doing the first part of the Form is Not the Work, which is part of the family constellation training, we spent a day watching people's faces. So, the different muscle movements. You can tell a lot by somebody's body language. So I can see when somebody walks into a room, their head is down, it's defeat, or somebody sits there with their shoulder up like this, is that something they had to do as a kid? I've got a young woman who sits there with her hands like this and her shoulders are up. Well, that's a defensive move. Do you know what I mean? So when you're with somebody who you can feel that, you regulate yourself. You can feel their vibe. You can feel that, and like you say, it's a frequency. And energy is a frequency, and rage is a frequency, just as anything else is a frequency. So you can feel that frequency. So when you're feeling somebody on edge, like you said, you regulate yourself, because if you are regulated, if you can bring yourself into a regulated, that's the frequency you give off, they'll feel regulated. Nothing to respond to. Their nervous system is not responding to your nervous system, and your nervous system then won't be responding to their nervous system. So we become like the what would you call it? I'm sure there's probably an electrical term for it, where you become well, like the lightning rod, if you like. You're the Buddha was under the Bodhi tree, and he sat there and he became the calm center. Or, if we were talking about Christianity, Jesus is the ultimate in, like calm, centered, regulated, a regulated nervous system. So when people were with Jesus in the Bible, they felt that as he, and sometimes I think that walking on water or the waters parting of the sea is an analogy for sort of like a regulated nervous system, because he calmed the waters, you know what I mean? The water parted and he walked through, or he walked on top. It's an analogy for a regulated, calm, connected, confident, So if you do that for yourself, you'll do that for the whole room.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that if you recognize danger, you don't get the hell out of there.
Yeah, there's that nuance, isn't it? And that's where it's really important to be able to be discerning.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because you're not going to regulate. If anybody out there at the moment is living in a situation where they're living with somebody who is definitely not regulated and is actually very dangerous in their dysregulation, regulating your nervous system around them will only do so much.
Yeah.
You're in danger, you need to get out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the work around that is, if you can't, is why can't you? What is the underlying belief that you hold that you can't actually get away from this situation? And this is the tragedy for children, because there are children who are in these situations. I was myself. My father was violent. I couldn't, and this is what I say to people, when you're a kid, you can't look at your child, your parents and go, well, they're fucked. They're doing a shit job and I'm going to move out. You can't, don't do that.
You can't, no.
You mold yourself. You learn to be a certain way to stay safe around them, and we can't. And so how can we blame ourselves when what we were doing, the way that we are now, was developed as a survival mechanism? It was developed so that we could survive in a really volatile, dangerous space. My dad was dangerous. He was angry, and I learned that I have to watch what was going on and modify myself to be in that situation, and this is, and unfortunately there's some people who end up on the streets because they're so dysregulated. And then we get to talking to resilience. How do we create resilience in ourselves? What makes one child a certain way and another child another way? And there's all sorts of nuances. But fundamentally, the simple answer to your question is if you're in with someone who's on edge and they're not dangerous, if you're not sensing danger, if there's danger, get away. But if you're in a situation where you're, like, you can recognize that you can feel it, you can feel the increase, breathe yourself. You have two choices. You can either stay and breathe and stay in that situation, or you just get out. You get away from it. I wouldn't advise anybody to stay in a dangerous situation because they think that they might be able to regulate it out. Regulate their way out of it. No, that's silly.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you shared all of that. It's just, and I think as well, for people doing the work, like obviously anyone who's tuning into this today or whenever they're listening is doing the work, because even this conversation is creating change, is creating ripples. And I think we need to allow, like, if we can allow for the recognition of the patterns and the programs that we've developed to keep safe, to empower us to go, wow, my body, my system is that powerful. It kept me safe in all of these situations. It's served its purpose now. Now it's time for me to change it so I can thrive. It's time to thrive now.
Yes, 100%. You've given me goosebumps. It's a really important thing to recognize, and I often describe it like, like we're like weebles. Did you have weebles over here in Australia? I grew up with weebles.
Weebles.
There was a TV program and it was a cartoon and they were round things and the catch line was weebles wobble but they don't fall down, and like we wobble. There's no shame in wobbling. Like this last 2 weeks when I felt really unwell, I still can't smell and I still can't taste, and I'm like, no, I don't like it. I don't want to not smell and not taste. I want to be able to taste my dinner, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
making things with cayenne pepper and going, can I taste it? Can I taste it?
Yeah.
And there's this part of me that's really impatient. And I'm like, okay, all right, all right, all right. So there's an impatient part that really wants this to be over, and I really don't feel very well. So I'm putting myself in a dysregulated nervous system. I'm not going to get better if I'm like all angsty about the fact that I can't taste and I can't smell, you know?
Mm.
So I thought, okay, so how do I look at this that I can accept where I'm at the moment? What am I learning from this? How am I learning from this situation? Well, first and foremost, it was the first message was slow down. You can't do everything and you need to rest. Now, I've got parts that keep me going, you know,
Yeah.
like I'm like the ever ready and just keep going. And I'm aware of those parts. So my body is actually saying, Julie, you actually needed an extra week of holiday. You needed to just not go back to work quite so quickly. So what have I learned from this experience? How then can I modify? I can blame myself and be harsh on myself. Oh, you're sick, or I can say, well, this is a detox. This is coming up for something. How do I utilize this for the best way for me? You know, because it's all about it, and without, you know, it is all about us. And this is why I think sometimes this whole narcissistic thing has been pushed as far as it has been, because anybody thinking that they're about themselves can be called a narcissist, and then that's a bad thing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, we should be looking after ourselves, you know. As children, we have to be a little bit narcissistic, if that's what we want to call it, because we have to look after ourselves, you know. We have to have our needs met as children, because otherwise we don't get them met. We can't go out to work and get our own food. We can't pay our own bills. We can't heat ourselves. We can't clothe ourselves. We can't do anything. So we have to be a little bit narcissistic to get our needs met. But the unfortunate thing is that when that kind of like sort of becomes behaviors and patterns that, I don't want to say pathologize. I don't want to say that, because that's not the term. But what they do is they take over, if you like, and they become a characteristic. You know, they become our personality, which is ego. And that's another bullshit nonsense as well that I want to completely dispel, is that all this getting rid of your ego. Your ego personality.
Yeah,
Your
you need it.
personality is who you are. You are who you present to the world. You know, you don't want to get rid of that. Get to know it. Absolutely. Get to know it, but you don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to be a zombie. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, definitely don't want to be a zombie.
I think there's enough of them out there already.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, I just looked at the time and I know that you have to go. Yeah. So we're cutting. So I mean, I could talk to you all day, Julie. You're just absolutely bloody phenomenal. For people who are tuning in and would love to connect with you, where is the best way to find you?
Yeah, I've got a website, a public website, and that's Refocus Counselling, www.refocuscounselling.com. And now that I've updated the domain, it's back up again, because that gave me conniptions yesterday. I was like, hey, what's happened to my website?
Gotta love that.
Yeah, so yes, that's the best way to get through to me. There's a contact form. You can send me an email. I have a little bit of a waiting list at the moment, but by all means, my people are always coming and going, which is great. That's what I want them to do. Do you know what I mean? Coming and going and coming and going, because my business is Refocus for Empowered Living. That's because for me, as soon as I did this work, I have parts of me now that feel empowered. I'm not saying that I'm perfect, and I'm not saying that but I have resilience and I have resourcefulness, and I know who I am and I know what's happening. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I've just had such the best time hanging out with you today, Julie. You're just awesome. And while I'm thanking you, I just want to thank you at home for tuning in to this epic chinwag. I hope you have loved it as much as I have, and I hope you have too, Julie. It's
Yes,
just been Yeah, it's just been awesome. So, as always, give it a like, comment, share, all that fun stuff. Always love hearing from you. Thank you for being here. And Julie, just thank you again for sharing your heart, your wisdom, and just your epic soul with all of us today.
Thanks, Narita, for the opportunity. Thank you very much. Lovely.